Okay, so are you ready to dive into this?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Because today we're looking at unregulated robotics, and wow,
Yeah.
um, it's a lot.
Yeah.
You gave me a lot of material, and it's fascinating. A little bit scary, honestly.
Yeah,
It's one of those things where it's like, the future is here,
it is.
but also, are we ready for this?
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. And it's interesting you say that because I think a lot of people, when they think of this technology, they immediately go to like these dystopian sci-fi movies.
Right.
But the reality is it's already here in many ways, and it's advancing so rapidly. We're talking robots doing complex
Yeah,
surgeries.
I couldn't believe that. Like,
Wait.
robots are doing surgeries.
It's incredible, right? And self-driving cars navigating rush hour traffic.
I know. I know. And that's what kind of blows my mind is like the things that are happening. Meanwhile, I'm like, can barely program my DVR. It's mind-blowing, but it feels like we're building the plane as we're flying it, which is never a relaxing experience, especially when you think about like the stakes are so high. You know, the source material, one of the things they compare it to is like pharmaceuticals or aviation industries that are heavily regulated because if something goes wrong, it's catastrophic.
It can be, absolutely.
But for robots, it seems like we're still kind of like passing notes in class.
Yeah.
You know, like figuring it out as we go along.
Yeah, and that's a great comparison. And it really highlights the urgency of this whole thing, I mean, the lack of a cohesive global framework for robotics is really concerning when you think about it. You've got different countries, companies, even individuals in some cases, all developing robots with their own ideas about capabilities, ethics, safety protocols.
We're all over the place.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Okay, so let's bring this down to earth a little bit. Let's use an example because I think a lot of people listening might be like, okay, unregulated robotics, I don't really get it. But the source talks about self-driving cars, which, full disclosure, still freak me out a little bit. Like that to me feels very, very Minority Report.
Sure, yeah.
Like it's cool, but also what could possibly go wrong?
I'm with you.
A lot.
Yeah.
So with those, the source points out accidents have already happened. Self-driving cars have been in accidents, which begs the question, and I think this is one of the biggest questions for me. If something goes wrong, who's liable?
Yeah.
Is it the person behind the wheel who wasn't really paying attention because they thought the car was?
Right.
Is it the manufacturer? Is it the programmer?
It's a huge question.
Who do you blame?
It is, and it's one that the legal system is grappling with right now because, as you said, these aren't hypothetical questions anymore. They're real.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
Like our existing laws, they weren't written for this.
They weren't, no.
This is a whole other level.
No, and it's only going to get more complicated.
Yeah.
The source talks about robots in, like, healthcare, law enforcement, even military applications.
Yeah, they're not just vacuuming anymore.
We're talking about life or death situations here.
Exactly.
It's a big deal, and that's where it gets really serious. Imagine a robot assisting in surgery, responding to a crime in progress.
Right, like these are huge.
Split-second decisions, often with limited information, and the source even uses the term, and this is kind of chilling, killer robots, to describe these autonomous weapons systems.
Okay, see, that's what I'm talking about. That's the Terminator scenario, right?
Yes.
Where it's like, this is getting out of hand.
Right.
It's unsettling, to say the least. And then on top of that, and this is something I hadn't really thought about, the source mentioned how vulnerable robots are to hacking. Like, we're so focused on what they can do, are we forgetting to think about how someone could use that against us?
It's a major vulnerability.
Yep.
And one that I think we're just starting to understand the implications of. You're right. Most robots aren't designed with cybersecurity as the main priority.
It's an afterthought. Like, oh yeah, maybe we should make sure someone can't just like take over this thing and,
Exactly.
cause havoc.
It's like forgetting to lock your front door and then wondering why someone walked in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not like someone's coming to steal your TV. It's
Yeah.
someone coming to like reprogram your robot to do who knows what.
You got it. And the consequences, as you can imagine, could be pretty terrifying, especially as these robots become more interconnected. Think about power grids, hospitals, transportation systems. All of these things are becoming more reliant on robots, and if those robots are vulnerable...
So not only do we have robots potentially making life or death decisions, but we also have the potential for those decisions to be hijacked by like whoever, any bad actor out there who's got a computer and a grudge. Okay, yeah. I'm officially nervous.
Yeah, it's a valid concern, for sure. But I think it's important to remember, this is powerful technology, with the potential for enormous good or for bad. And this source material doesn't try to downplay the risks.
Right.
But it also reminds us that we're not powerless in this situation, you know?
Yeah.
We have the opportunity to shape the way that this goes, to shape the trajectory of robotics, and to make sure that it's a force for good.
Okay, I like the sound of that, but how?
Hmm.
How do we do that? Because right now, I'm feeling a lot more of the risk and a lot less of the, this is all going to be fine,
Right.
sunshine and roses. The source mentions international regulations. And while, yeah, on paper that sounds great, I'm having a hard time imagining
Sure.
getting like the world leaders to agree on, a lunch order, let alone something like this.
Right. It's no small feat, for sure. But think about it. Like, we have managed to establish international agreements on things like nuclear weapons,
Right.
climate change,
Yeah.
and those are huge, complex, potentially existential threats.
Right.
And while those agreements aren't perfect, it does show that global cooperation is possible when everyone agrees that the stakes are high enough.
Okay.
And the source makes a really compelling case that when it comes to robotics, the stakes couldn't be higher.
Okay, that's a good point. All right, so let's say, best case scenario, we do manage to like wrangle everyone to the table and we're going to have this big robot summit.
Mm-hmm.
What does that even look like? Are we talking like a robot rule book that's like thicker than the dictionary?
Well, and that's where it gets really tricky because a one-size-fits-all approach is just not going to work.
Right.
We're talking about a field that is so vast and it's changing so quickly. We've got everything from, microscopic nanobots that are being used in medicine to these massive industrial robots that could probably build a car before we finish the sentence.
Right.
So trying to come up with like a single set of rules for all of those things is just not going to work.
So it needs to be a little more like tailored.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes this, bringing together a diverse group of stakeholders, governments, industry leaders, the tech people, but also ethicists, the general public.
Wow.
Having this big global discussion, finding some common ground, establishing what are the potential benefits here and what are the risks that we really need to be concerned about.
So it's not just a tech issue. It's a human issue too.
It's a human issue with huge societal implications.
It's like the United Nations for robots, except instead of arguing about borders, they're arguing about like ethical programming and like cybersecurity protocol.
So you go.
I'd watch that. That'd be good TV.
Right.
But okay, even with international regulations, like let's say we do that, we still have the people who are building the robots.
Right.
And the source, it really drives home this idea of we have to bake in the ethics, the cybersecurity from the ground up.
Absolutely.
It can't be like an afterthought.
It cannot be an afterthought. And that's something that I think, historically we haven't been great at, right?
Right.
As a society, we tend to kind of develop the technology first and then ask the what if questions later.
Right. It's too late.
And then it's like, well, what do we do now?
Right.
So the source is really pushing for this idea of like responsible robotics, essentially.
So it's not just what they can do, it's how they're designed to do it, right?
You got it. Making sure that they're developed, they're deployed in a way that aligns with, what we value as humans. And I think it requires, a shift in how we think about it,
Right.
both in the actual development process, but also like in education.
Oh, interesting.
For like future roboticists, like we need to be teaching not just the how-to, but also like the ethical stuff.
Right. So it's like my mom always said, it's not enough to be brilliant. You have to be good.
That's it.
And she was talking about like cleaning my room.
Right.
But I think it applies to robots too.
I think it applies to robots as well.
But let's face it, even with the best of intentions, there's still this big question mark hanging over all of this, which is jobs.
Right.
Robots are getting more and more sophisticated every day. They can do more. And so what happens when the robots come for our jobs?
Yeah, and it's a valid concern, and the source doesn't shy away from that at all. It actually really stresses the importance of being proactive about that.
Okay.
Not just waiting for it to happen and then being like, oh, shoot, what are we going to do now?
So less ripping the Band-Aid off and more like slowly, gently peeling it off.
Exactly. Anticipate, identify the industries, the jobs that are most at risk, and then come up with strategies to support those workers.
That's a lot of foresight, though. Like, we're supposed to be retraining people for jobs that don't even exist yet.
It does sound daunting, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But think about it this way. Think about, like, the transition from horse-drawn carriages to the first automobiles. It totally revolutionized transportation, and it changed the entire job market. You went from needing blacksmiths and carriage drivers to needing mechanics
Okay, yeah.
and chauffeurs. So robotics is presenting us with kind of that same kind of crossroads.
So instead of blacksmiths and carriage drivers, we'll have robot mechanics and, I don't know, AI whisperers.
Right.
Okay, I could get into that.
I mean, it's a vast oversimplification.
Sure.
But I think you're getting the idea here that the important thing is that people are equipped with the skills.
Right.
And given the support they need to adapt and succeed in this new environment.
It's about adapting and not going extinct, essentially.
There you go. It's about riding the wave of technological change rather
Yeah.
than being crushed by it.
Okay, I like that analogy a lot better.
Yeah.
It makes me feel a lot less like I should be running for the hills.
Exactly. And I think
Wow.
that's the spirit. This source document, yes, it lays out some pretty, potentially scary scenarios.
Right.
But ultimately, it's a message of, we have a choice here. We can influence how this goes. We can make sure that robotics serves us, that it makes things better, not worse. It's kind of a call to action disguised as a research paper.
So don't just sit there being scared of the robot uprising.
Right.
Get involved. Learn about it.
Exactly.
Be part of, making sure that that doesn't happen, or that if it does, it's the good kind of robot uprising.
There you go.
The one where they do our dishes and fold laundry.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm feeling very cautiously optimistic now.
Good. I like to hear that. It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledging the risks,
Yeah.
but also being excited about the possibilities.
Yeah.
Because there are huge possibilities here.
Absolutely.
And I think, that's an ongoing conversation.
Right.
And we need to be having it, constantly. And we need to be willing to adapt as the technology changes.
It's not a finish line. It's a journey.
There you go.
We're on the road. Speaking of which, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
But it feels like we're just getting started.
Oh, yeah. This is just scratching the surface.
We're just at the tip of the iceberg here, right? Yeah, it's like we walked into the control room of a giant robot factory, and there's just buttons and levers everywhere.
Right.
And we're just like, what does this one do?
Exactly, yeah.
Ooh, sparkly. But you're right, it's a journey. I think that's a good way to put it. We don't have all the answers, that's for sure. But by even just having this conversation, by talking about it, by acknowledging the complexities.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're at least pointing ourselves at the general direction of not completely messing this up.
Right. I think so. And I think those nuances, that complexity that you're talking about, that's the stuff that often gets lost in the conversation,
Right.
Because it's easy to get really excited or really scared. You think about robots and it's either this utopian dream or it's a dystopian nightmare.
Right. It's either, they're going to do all our work for us, or it's Terminator.
Exactly. But the reality is always more complicated, right? It's somewhere in between. And that's why these conversations are so important, because we have to be willing to look at all of it, not just the scary part.
The sexy headlines, yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So less robots are going to steal all our jobs and more. How can we use robots to maybe solve climate change or something like that?
Absolutely, because there's a ton of good that can come from this technology. I mean, the source material, it highlights some really exciting possibilities. Imagine robots working with firefighters, to go into those really dangerous situations, or, helping doctors perform these super intricate surgeries.
I can get down with robot doctors.
Right. Or even exploring the depths of space, the bottom of the ocean.
Sign me up.
We're talking about things that, we can barely even imagine right now because this technology makes it possible.
Okay, so I'm back on Team Robot, I think.
There you go.
As long as they're the good kind, the ones that are going to explore the ocean, not, take over the Death Star or whatever.
Exactly. And that's the thing, right? That's why all of this stuff we've been talking about, the regulations, the ethical considerations, it's so important because it's about making sure that we're using this technology for good,
So it's not just about building cool robots. It's about building responsible robots.
100%.
Right. It's almost like we need a robot parenting guide.
Yes.
How do you raise a robot?
Right.
'Cause you wouldn't just give a toddler a chainsaw and be like, go build a treehouse, have fun, don't hurt yourself.
Right. You got to teach them.
You got to set some boundaries. You got to teach them how to use it responsibly.
Exactly. And I think we're starting to realize that applies to robots too.
Yeah, I think responsible robotics needs to be its own thing.
I think so too.
A whole scientific field. You have to get a degree in it.
Yeah, where's my robot parenting manual? Because, yeah, this is powerful stuff we're talking about, and we got to treat it that way.
So it's not just on the robot scientists to figure all this out. It's like we all have a role to play in this, right?
Absolutely. We created this technology. It's up to us to make sure that it's used responsibly. It's a shared responsibility for sure.
I feel like we could talk about this for like 5 more hours, but I think we're going to have to start wrapping things up.
Oh, right.
So for everyone listening, thank you for coming along on this deep dive with us.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
Hopefully you learned something new about unregulated robotics.
Yeah.
Maybe you're a little bit more terrified. Maybe you're a little bit more optimistic.
Hopefully a little bit of both.
Yeah, a little column A, a little column B. But most importantly, we hope this has sparked your curiosity.
Yeah.
And that you'll continue to learn about this stuff and be part of the conversation.
Because it's an important one.
Because it's a big one.
It is.
And it's only going to get bigger. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and let's all try not to create Skynet.
Here.
All right, that's it for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.